Hey there, this is Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So happy to have you back here. And this is one of the last few of our sessions this year. So we are really happy to offer you one that's a CFRE accredited one. And that means for those of you who don't know that not only are you going to get some great instruction from a leader in the field today about this subject, of course, about your board, but you're also going to have the opportunity to pick up a credit towards your certified fundraising executive status. And so if you're collecting those, you'll find that we've been offering those throughout the year, and we'll be offering a lot more next year as well. So feel free to take a look for any of the sessions in the series that offer that over at the DonorSearch site. The site of our sponsor has been sponsoring this series since 2016, very generously. We are so grateful to them for that. You're going to find all the information both on what they do to help us understand our donors and board members for that matter, but also all the content from the Philanthropy Mastermind series over at DonorSearch.net, including a lot of these CFRE classes. So that's a lot of preamble, but I just want to welcome you and of course introduce our presenter today with encouragement to utilize, which I see you're already doing, the chat and the Q&A throughout. So thank you very much for warming up that space. We really do love that. Now, of course, I want to do the most pleasurable thing that I have in my role as the host here, and that is to pass the baton to our friend Dave Sternberg, who is, of course, the founding partner at his firm, Loring Sternberg and Associates, who's going to be talking about this subject today as he titles it right here, Webster defines dysfunction as your board, an experience I think too many of us have had. So he will address that right now. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming and presenting today.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. Just to give you a bit of a flavor about me, I'm a graduate of the Ohio State University a long time ago, but I've been in the sector my entire career, and worked in a number of different nonprofits, and then started a firm in '96. But really sort of like to share, I'm on the fundraising school faculty at the Lilly School of Philanthropy, and have served as a senior governance consultant with BoardSource since, it goes back 2008 maybe, and wrote a book, Fearless Fundraising for Nonprofit Boards. And so the title of this presentation is centered around a lot of client work and many years of feeling and hearing the challenges that organizations have with their board. So it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's also in many cases very true. And it isn't meant to be a reference to anyone who's serving or volunteering. So as you'll see how that unfolds. So let me start with a question for you. And if you would be so kind as to share your responses in the chat. I often start a board retreat or a training session and ask, I say organizations, our nonprofit organizations need volunteers, staff, and board members as our human capital. Okay, unless you're a grassroots organization, you don't have staff, but you need this kind of human capital. So I often ask, who is the most important? Is it volunteers? Is it staff? Or is it board members? And I let that flow. And I'm asking you all, what's your opinion relative to who you think is the most important in the organization? So we have a vote for staff. I can see rolling in. We have all of them. So go ahead and share your thoughts. Staff, all, the CEO. Usually the CEOs put CEO in. So I just want to let you know that may not be the case here. So as you can see and you watch, you get a variety of answers in there across the board. But for those of you who said all, you're 100% correct, but there's a caveat. It is that board members and volunteers, while both volunteers, are different jobs. And I share that because what we tend to do is look solely and only within our volunteer corps oftentimes for individuals that we think might make great board members, when in fact, they would simply make great volunteers and shouldn't be on our boards. So I bring this distinction up because they're all different jobs that have a different requirement. And I want to give you the latitude to understand that board members is a distinct job from volunteers, and it is distinct from staff, et cetera. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the day, because at the end of the day, organizations' challenges they're self-created. So they have to understand the distinction in the positions. But then when they don't, they layer into this the notion that we're just going to recruit people to serve on our board, and the environment we operate in is one in which not only do we not know the distinction of the positions, but we also don't know or agree on what the role of the board is. We don't know what a board member's function or the board's role is. And this isn't because people aren't well-meaning. It isn't because people don't care. In fact, they care so much that they can overlook the fact that as volunteers, this should be treated at a different level and seen differently. They mean well, and that's great. And we can't exist without them. But what that lends us to is an environment where we don't understand the distinction and we don't share the role. And then we end up looking for PLUs. I know everyone said, look for plus, PLUs. We end up looking for people like us. And so we create an environment that's well-meaning, but can often result in a lot of stress. The CEO or executive director wants the board to behave in a certain way. The board expects certain things from the CEO. There's a lot of tension and frustration. Well, today is about how do we break through that dysfunction with what we understand about how a board should function, operate, and be assembled. And that's what we're going to do together for the remainder of our time. I start this conversation by sharing with you the 10 responsibilities of nonprofit boards. This comes, as you can see here, from a board source document, book, actually. And many of my colleagues and I have been sharing this for years. And here's why I start this discussion. This is kind of how this evolved. For many years, when working with boards, prior to, I'll have a discussion with the CEO or executive director and the board chair, and they'll have an expectation for what they want. I want the board to be better fundraisers. I want them to be more engaged. I love that word. I'm not sure what it means. We want to move from a working board. Side note, all boards are working boards. The question is, what is the work? So I think it's important we back the train up, if you will, and talk about what is the work. What are the responsibilities? So I'm going to go through the 10 and as we see them and help you put some context around what is the function of a board. One is determining the organization's mission and purpose. Well, many of us are involved with organizations that already have a mission and purpose. But the founding board has the responsibility of establishing that. If you're part of an organization that's in a federated model where you're an affiliate, a chapter, a state organization of a national organization, your mission is derived from the direction of that organization that serves all the affiliates. But a board's responsibility is essentially to ask itself, are we being consistent with that mission? And a board has the right to change the mission of an organization. So determine the mission and purpose. Where there is staff, the board selects the chief executive of the organization. It's their job to determine who's going to run this place. They don't, there's many ways to do that. Could be a discussion for another day, but the board is in charge and gets to decide who that individual is. And also importantly is supporting that individual and reviewing his or her performance. So that individual is not only hired by the board, but there's an annual performance review, and so there's feedback loop on their performance, and supporting that individual's performance. Do we invest in their professional development, for example? So how are we growing our leader from within? So those are functions. Those are the first 3 responsibilities of a board. The next, ensure effective organizational planning. I ask all the time, does your organization have a strategic plan? Now, the term strategic plan brings with it a lot of ulcer-like symptoms because creating one and following one and all of those things are important, but they mean something different to almost every board member. But at the end of the day, it is the board's responsibility to set the direction of the organization. The organization, we intend to accomplish A, B, C, and D over the next handful of years. That direction is set by the board. How that is done, work plans, timing, like those are other issues that may or may not to some degree involve our boards. But at the end of the day, setting the strategic direction is the role of the board. 5, ensuring adequate resources. Now, this isn't fancy language or code. This is board members must ensure that there are enough resources coming into the organization for it to do its work. This is fundraising. Boards have a responsibility to be engaged in the development process where they are both cultivating, stewarding, and in many cases soliciting gifts. They need to make sure that revenue is coming in the door. And what hamstrings many organizations, and I hear this over and over, is the staff will tell us that the board sees it as solely a staff responsibility. I've had board members tell me that's the staff's responsibility. And indeed, while the staff has a fundraising responsibility, it isn't solely theirs. So 6 is manage resources effectively. Providing financial oversight, which happens to be a legal duty, but also understanding the budget, how we created the budget, where the revenue is coming from, how we're spending that revenue. This is, as one person said to me, other people's money. And we want to be cognizant of how we're both budgeting and spending that money. And we're pretty good at it in the sector. The big challenge we run into is that board members often believe that this means that there's this magic ratio of how much money we should spend on programs versus overhead, which is, again, another subject full of a lot of issues. But what organizations tend to do then is not invest in the organization. And so managing resources effectively includes not only ensuring that we're delivering services, but that might require that we're investing in our organization by growing staff or training or investing in things that aren't direct service delivery, but could grow our entity. And I am infamous for saying to board members, are you here to maintain the status quo, or are you here to grow the entity? Because growing the entity means doing more of your work in your communities. 7, determine, monitor, and strengthen the organization's programs and services. And this can be a bit of a challenge because oftentimes this is interpreted as you want us to micromanage the staff as they deliver our work. And in fact, this is not what that means. This is a discussion at a high level about overall impact, meeting programmatic goals, accomplishing the things we said we were going to do. It is not going in and taking from the board level, taking a look at our programmings and doing analysis and providing feedback. If that's something that the board determines needs to be done, they need to maybe work with the CEO or exec director to see that that's done, but that's not what this means. So this isn't an invitation to micromanage. This is an invitation to make sure we understand what we're trying to accomplish and we're doing it in the best way possible programmatically. 8 is enhance the organization's public standing. So are our board members going and advocating for our organizations in public, at speaking opportunities, doing advocacy work, within your community, whatever that looks like. We are promoting the organization. We are the face of the organization. We have a major role as board members to make sure that people know about our organization. 9 is ensure legal and ethical integrity and maintain accountability. This sounds fun. I share this. It just sounds so exciting. We are all organizations that have some legal obligations, both at the state in which we're incorporated. The IRS has some rules we need to follow, and 990s in both cases, et cetera. But other things like, do we have, accounting policies, investment policies? Are we independently assessed from a financial standpoint? What does the HR department look like? Do we have the policies and procedures in place that are required of us as a business? We are a public company. The fact that we're a not-for-profit organization and have that tax status does not mean we don't have this obligation. And then 10 is recruit and orient new board members and assess board performance. So is there a strategic way in which board members are identified? They're thoughtfully recruited. They're prepared before they begin service. On an annualized basis, board members' performance is assessed. Self-assessment is something I prefer. And those that are not performing, they are offered a different role. Maybe they're removed from the board. And I've seen that happen because there is a place for everyone in our organizations. It just may be that the board isn't that place. And I share that pretty frequently with folks that, again, volunteers are needed, board members are needed. The two may just be different roles and require different skill sets. So I start this conversation from what is the actual role of the board, and this is the actual role of the board. I think knowing the actual role makes us better at understanding what we're looking for when we're out recruiting or adding board members. So we don't end up with people we like who didn't know what the role was. We need to know what the role was. That to me has always been issue number one. So think about what the role is in your organization, how it is understood by board members. Is there a common agreement among them? Is this some document that they have to, sign, et cetera? Okay. We will talk about the implications of recruitment and board building against those 10 roles here in a second. But those are the 10 roles. I find setting the stage and saying, what are the roles is issue one that we run into. Coinciding with that issue is the notion that, well, Dave, I understand we get the role. Terrific. Now, how do we go about bringing board members to the organization? And this is the most fundamentally important issue facing board development in the sector. And I like to use the board building cycle, also a board source publication, and most recently updated by a colleague of mine, Susan Meyer. And what I'm going to do is walk you through that, because it is the guidelines, the framework, if you will, about how to do this work. And it will set you up in an environment to have the right players so that we're not, trying to overcome the dysfunction we've created by not having a strategic way to do this. Now, there's 9 parts to this, to the board building cycle, and they are, I may use the word steps, but they are ongoing. The fact that it's a cycle, and the word cycle is so large here to me, is important because this has to happen continuously. So while I present it in 9 parts, it is, continuously being regenerated and working again as we go. This is a year-round function. Step 1 is to identify the kinds of skills, knowledge, expertise. Who do we as an organization need to have on the board in order to move our institution forward? And what we recommend is that organizations create a board building matrix, spreadsheet, profile, whatever word you like. And it looks a little something like this. And this is an example of what this might look like for you. So, and I like the visual here, but I encourage you to think about this and sort of personalize it for your organization. But basically, along the vertical axis, we want to have descriptions of categories of qualities that are important to our organization. And you may have way more than this. This gives you a sense that for many organizations, this is multiple things, but you'll see age, you'll see race and ethnicity, gender. You probably want to think beyond male and female. What is the fundraising connectivity? What are community connections, leadership capability, et cetera, and professions, et cetera. And you basically assess your current board. You would take each of their names, and board member 1 is Mary, board member 2 is Bob, board member 3 is Jane. And you would put an X near all the things that describe those current board members. And And I often ask, if you did this, what would you notice? I've made a matrix that shows the skill sets that exist on our board now. Well, you would notice two things. One, you would notice what you presently have. It's all, it's all visual there for you to see by the checks or X's that you put in the boxes. And you would notice what you're missing. You would determine what you don't have. And you look at all of the areas that are not checked. And you need to decide, if it's not checked, is it important to our organization? So if those boxes are unchecked, which of those do we care the most about? Is it important to us that we have every box checked? Now, in the real, from a practical standpoint, you cannot have every box checked. We're not attempting to do that. What we're attempting to do is give you a way to identify who are the most important and what are the most important criteria that you want to use as you look and determine, who you should be looking for in board members. And so you take those criteria, maybe there's 5 or 6 or 8 that really jump out that are important to you, and you create a profile. So you would take that profile, and I always say, go old school, put it on a piece of paper, make a list of it, and present that list at a board meeting, pass it around the boardroom table, and let people look at it. And I, pause in a board retreat and I say, well, why am I doing this? And these are the answers I get. Well, people want to know what you're looking for. Well, that's true. So people have an idea, so people can think about it. And I say, what I really want are names of people. I need board members to take that list, and I need them to look at the 5 or 6 pieces of criteria. And I need them to think about, who in my sphere of influence do I know that fits that criteria? And there might be 5 or 6 items, as I noted. They don't have to meet them all. 1 or 2 are great. 3 are great. 4 is great. If they meet none, then they're probably not someone that we should pursue to potentially be on our board. So you want names of people. And those names aren't people we're immediately going to create a board position for. They're simply names of people who have been strategically identified that we might cultivate and recruit and participate in at some point being on our board. And I want you to think also about that matrix and think about issues around, are you an environment where you are sensitive to the makeup of your board and who needs to be serving on your board, so that it provides the input and experiences and thoughts of people who may not be PLUs, those people like us. And so are you functioning at a level in a way that includes people that aren't people like us and gives them voice, gives them authority, gives them power, brings diversity you might not have? And that looks different for everybody. But, being thoughtful about, as our organization progresses forward, how do we make a place for everybody at our boardroom table? Now, we have a list of those names, and we need to cultivate those individuals, right? So we have the list. So what we want to do is take the list and start meeting with those folks. And you want to cultivate them over time. What does that look like? Well, they might come to a board meeting. They might serve on a committee. They might attend our annual rubber chicken dinner. They might meet with other board members. They might meet our CEO. They might come to our organization to see how our programs and services are operating. That whole list of things. If someone's name is on our list, we want to cultivate them. We want them to have the opportunity to understand us and see our organization. I know organizations that in this process will share their financial statements, which I think is terrific. But cultivate is a multi-step process that takes a little time, right? It isn't, I have Dave's name on my list, I'm going to go invite him to be on my board. That would be item 3. That would be recruit, and we're not there yet. And so over this period of time, we're dating, if you will. And there will come a time when it is appropriate to recruit. And recruit will look, in my opinion, like this. Individuals have been identified, they have been cultivated, and we will invite them and in the following way. I might say, Dave, I know you've become more familiar with the work of our organization. You've seen the impact it has. You've met with board members. You've had a chance to visit with staff and get an idea of the impact we have in our community. I wanted to know, 30 days from now, we're having an election. And during that election, we are replacing some board members whose terms have expired. And we'd like to consider you to fill one of the seats of those retiring board members and serve a term on our board. Now, that's something that has many facets to it. And I want you to think about what it was I just shared. I said a couple of key things. One is, I want you to consider. I didn't say you're voted in. I said, would you consider? I said, it's 30 days from now, whatever that time frame is, 30, 60, 90. It isn't tomorrow. It's 30 days from now. I said, replacing board members whose terms have expired. And that is significant because it shows that this is not a lifetime commitment. There are many people on this call representing many different demographics and ages, generations. And the younger board members we have heard time and time again, this cannot be a lifetime commitment. So this is a timed thing. I'm not asking you for a commitment the rest of your life. And I said one term. So what I've bundled is, you're not rushed. It's thoughtful. We've been thinking about it. I want you to have the opportunity to consider the requests. I want you to have the opportunity to say yes or no. Here's frankly what the sector has gotten itself into. Rather than even start with these first 3 steps, the sector has found itself in a position where this is how it recruits. I'm the chair of the nominating committee. I'm eating my special K. I'm old, so I'm eating special K. And it dawns on me that 2 days from now, I have to bring some people to the board to be voted on to be board members. Okay. And I'm kind of in a panic. So, I call my good friend Mary, and I say, Mary, it's Dave. How are you? Mary says, I'm wonderful. I interrupt and say, I don't care, Mary. Here's the deal. I'm on the board of the XYZ. You're familiar with it. We do great work. We have, you'd be great on the board. You don't have to fundraise or go to meetings, or all you gotta do is, I'll call you Thursday. We'll add you to the board. It'll be great. Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Dave. We have lied. We have misled. We have begun the process of creating all this dysfunction that comes to me as the governance consultant. Let's stop shortcutting it and do it correctly. Oftentimes, clients are better off by electing nobody and doing this correctly than trying to fill a room with people who fog a mirror, as we say. So this process is year-round, and once you have names identified and you're strategic, becomes way easier actually to find board members, and you get a higher quality candidate who knows what the job is, because you, when you're recruiting them, are going to share with them what the board expectation is. You're going to tell them, here are the board expectations. You must attend meetings. You must serve on a committee. You must make a contribution from your own personal reserves, right? You must attend all events and activities, whatever that list is, okay? And it's clear to me, before I even say, yes, I am willing to be considered, that I know what the job is. And this becomes the watershed moment in eliminating some of this board dysfunction that we see over and over again. Now, steps 1 through 3 are about bringing people to the board, and this is called the board building cycle. So once we've brought people to the board, we need to build the board and build those individual board members. And so hopefully before their first board meeting, they can participate in a board orientation session. Now, fundamentally, I argue that if you've recruited well, they've kind of been exposed to quite a bit about the organization. But you still want to have an orientation session where they get the materials that they need in order to be an effective board member. So, the world famous board binder, and that might be a printed material. It might come in a binder. It might be on a portal that you use. I'm big on giving them a binder, even if you have a portal. But the history of the organization, the bylaws, board lists with bios, the dates of the board meetings, our marketing plan, staff members' names, or at least the CEO's name and contact information, the budget of the organization, right? The last audit. I would spend time going through these items with my new board members. I do not assume that board members who are new to the board know what it means to serve on a nonprofit board. Making that assumption delays the learning period and probably makes it a worse experience for board members. So don't assume that they know. Prepare them. Make them feel like they're ready to go before that first board meeting. And along with that is engaging board members. And so many really high functioning boards will assign a board buddy. They will say, Dave's skill set as a small business owner is marketing. And we have a marketing committee, or we have a visioning task force that meets and talks about ways to grow our program. I mean, get me connected, one, on the committee that's going to use my skill set best, and two, if you have a buddy program, is there someone that can be assigned to new board members to help speed up that learning curve? Now, this is all easier said than done, and my caveat is that we all have board members who are not good at being buddies, who are not dependable, who probably will make it a bit of a challenge for people to understand the culture more quickly. Maybe they don't even agree with the culture. The short version is you may have many board members who are never asked to be a board buddy, and that's okay. We want to create a culture, and by creating a culture, we don't ask people who don't get it to educate those who know nothing about it. So make sure there's an opportunity for people who are good at this to do this kind of work. The other is educate. Now, if I ask a board and say, what should we educate board members about? This is what I'm going to hear, and I hear this all the time. Well, Dave, they need to know the mission, okay? And I usually say is that, they have to recite that in front of everybody. Dave, they need to know about our programs and services. They need to know how many people we serve. They need to know. They are reciting the things that I argue they are familiar with in two ways. One, during recruitment, they got familiar with your organization. Two, when you oriented them, if you wanted to go deeper on some of those subjects. For me, education is a variety of things that are the things that will fundamentally make me a better board member. So let me give you a few examples. One is, as an organization, when we consider all the work that we do, what are some examples of our specific impact? What are trends and issues and things that I need to be aware of relative to both the nonprofit sector, but also our ecosystem of the kind of work we do? We're working in food insecurity. What's happening relative in our community around food insecurity or domestic violence, or et cetera, et cetera. Are you training board members how to ask for money? And what's interesting about this is I get this request a lot. I'll have people reach out and say, I'd love to talk to you about coming in and helping my board members learn how to ask for money, teaching them to ask for money. And I'm always very apprehensive about that request, because I have no idea how these individuals were recruited and if they want to learn this. So again, this goes back to, how did we recruit them? What are the expectations? Do they know why they're here? Because going to train people who have no interest in doing this won't get you very far. So think about those things. Did we create confidence around having board members talk about wills and bequests, plan gifts? Again, any kind of legislation that's important to the work we do. Updates about competitors. What are our competitors doing? There are likely in this group today listening organizations where there's some overlap in service. And oftentimes our community doesn't know the distinctions, the differences, why there's two organizations seemingly doing the same thing. I want to be knowledgeable about what similar organizations are doing, because as I talk to my peers and friends, they're going to ask me, and I need to be able to answer those questions. And are we teaching board members to tell powerful stories? Two of the board roles, two of them are public advocacy, right? Being a public advocate for our organization and bringing revenue, doing development work, both of which benefit if board members can tell powerful stories. Teach board members how to speak about the organization in a compelling way. And it is not an issue of, do they like our organization? Do they know about our work? Of course, both of those are checks. Yep, check plus, okay? I went to school during a time when elementary school was check minus, check, or check plus. I don't know why those are the grades, but you've checked that box. They get it. They wouldn't be there otherwise. What is usually confided in me is, I'm not confident talking about the organization. We'll spend some time making board members confident. In some of these subjects, when we talk about education, I'm a big advocate that those educational moments are 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of every single board meeting. Not at the end, after we've done all our work and we're tired. Not for 2 hours, because we're not ready going to pay attention that long. Drips of educational opportunities and things that make me a better board member. So take stock of what we've talked about. We're talking about understanding the role. We're talking about strategically determining who we need on the board. We've talked about how to recruit them and how to cultivate them and then recruit them. And now we're talking about how to support and grow them as board members. 7 is rotating members off the board. This is term limits. Now, you can put in the chat, just for the sake of everyone else seeing this. Let me know yes or no, we have term limits. Just yes or no. Just put that in the chat. Let everyone here get a sense for how many individual organizations are represented that do or do not have term limits. And you're going to see a variety of answers. And the truth of the matter is that this can be a tough question to deal with. However, my opinion on this is exceptionally clear. Exceptionally clear. You need term limits. You need to have a maximum amount of time an individual can spend on your board, and then they need to roll off. In 30 years, I can think of maybe 1 or 2 examples where I might have said no, but most of the time I absolutely say yes. And, the short version of this is, we're asking board members to do a variety of things, much of which requires a couple things. One, it requires constant ability to change and think strategically and not be afraid to grow the entity. And the longer we're with an organization, the more staid we get in our ways. And many of us have board members who say, back when, okay, those are problematic for our organization. The other is that our personal pipeline, if you will, it shrinks over time. It doesn't grow. If we're working our own sphere of influence, we at some point will determine who of our peers care about our organization, the rest are not. So how do we expand networks and get into new communities and have the opportunity to connect to new people if we never rotate who's on our board? So I am hugely a proponent of term limits. Now, the caveat becomes that board members will view this as it's not a legal issue. Well, it's not. I know of no state that requires it. They will also make the argument that, well, having this, everybody would have to leave, and so we're just not going to do anything. And my argument is typically the fact that you don't have it is why you have a situation where everybody would be in that boat. So I'm not an advocate of starting over and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And there are ways to deal with this. But I am an advocate of bringing new thinking, new energy, new ideas to our organization in a way that's going to advance it forward. So being strategic is important, but also for board members who roll off, because we get the argument of it's either or, you're on the board or you're dead to us. How do we keep people engaged? I suggest things like senior leadership councils, senior leadership teams. Take highly functioning board members whose terms have expired and put them on these kinds of other adjunct bodies, but give it purpose. So we'd like you to respond to our strategic vision. We'd like you to have special seating at our events. We'd like you to go on fundraising calls with us. Think about how to engage them. They want to help. I know the number of times I've looked at board members and said, you know, if I could show you a way that you would never have to do strategic planning or ever have to attend another board meeting or board retreat, but you could still volunteer for the organization to do the things you love, what would you think of that? And 99 times out of 100, I get sign me up. That's the response. So this is an immensely important issue for many, many organizations. 8 is evaluate board member performance. How are we performing? Now I got a couple to share with you. One is a self-evaluation. This would literally at the final board meeting of the year be handed out on a piece of paper. People would, board members would put their names and date it. They'd fill out the questionnaire and they'd hand it in. They will hand it in. It is not a self-reflection moment for you to think about this and see how nice you feel when you get in a parking lot. This is an evaluation of, did I do the work? And in this example, it's pretty clear the answers are you did or you didn't. They aren't, I sort of feel like I did, I kind of maybe I did. My own opinion, you either did it or you didn't. Not sure is a soft no. Okay. Now, this should be reviewed by a committee of board members, a governance committee, which is a topic for another day, but who look at these evaluations and decide, have the individual board members performed. The other thing I see a lot of organizations do, and here's another example, and this is kind of a stitched together thing that I very much endorse, is a scorecard throughout the year. So what are the requirements? And you'll see, the give, and maybe you have a give and a get. Maybe you have a meeting attendance, committee attendance, event attendance. Keep tabs on people's performance on the board. And is it every month? Is it every quarter? We're distributing the scorecard. And when board members need to, many understand, how am I performing against my peers? And you can see on the far left here in the vertical axis a couple of options. Some organizations literally put the name. They don't hide the name. Some, are anonymous with a board member 1, 2, or board member AB, however, whatever your culture would be open to. But the truth of the matter is this: we live in an environment that is competitive. Now, there's degrees of competitiveness, but once score is being kept, people tend to get a lot more serious about their obligation. It is significantly important for board members to hold one another accountable, and in a way that allows everyone to be familiar with how are we performing as a group, so I can look at my performance and allow me to review my own performance so I know I'm doing my job. There is no better way to ensure that my board experience is one that is meaningful by, 1, being clear about the role, and 2, having an environment where there's accountability. There's nothing wrong. Volunteers might not get paid, but their obligations are enormous as far as our boards are concerned. And there should be some level of accountability for them. And again, a good governance committee makes for a good board. And that committee would do this work and look at board performance. Here's the good news. This is not the role of the staff to collect and evaluate and determine how board performance is. This is a board role. If the staff assists in collecting data, great. They're not involved, because at the end of the day, the staff, particularly our chief staff person, they work for the board. And I don't want to minimize the importance of a good relationship. and, overlook that. And look, I know that when it works well and there's, a lot of trust amongst the two, it's a wonderful thing. You all work, but the time comes when the staff is deciding who on the board's performing. That is a mismatch. That is not appropriate and shouldn't be done that way. Okay. So finally, step 9 is celebrate. Boards do exceptional work. It sounds like I went through 1 through 8. There's all these steps. It's negative. There's repercussions, and we should hold people accountable. Believe all those things. I also believe we should celebrate all of the wonderful things that board members do. I'll give you a couple of examples. I am a board chair of an organization that serves veterans on a national level. And we start our board meetings, and I start the board meetings by singling out board members and thanking them for things they have done between meetings. So I might thank someone for making donor thank you calls. I might thank someone for chairing a task force the previous quarter and appreciate their work and energy they put into that. The list goes on. That's one way to do it. I have sat in a board meeting and I watched this and I thought, well, this is going to be the cheesiest thing I've ever seen. And it in fact was not. It was really cool. Let me tell you about it. They had in the middle of the table a basket, and in the basket were kudos bars. Now, I'm not even sure if kudos bars are made anymore, to be honest with you, but they're the individually kind of wrapped granola bars. And they would start the meeting, and the board chair would say, Dave, would you like to start? And it would go around, and I'd say, well, I'd like to give a kudo to my fellow board member for something they did, right? And the basket would work its way around, and you didn't have to offer a board member a kudo. You may have chosen to. That was entirely up to you. And it was kind of fun. And there was a lot of laughter. And, so I thought what seemed cheesy was a nice way to honor and celebrate each other's work. So don't forget that that's part of this too. So 9 steps of the cycle, continually creating an environment where we've identified, we've recruited, we're supporting, we've evaluated, create accountability. You're going to likely see a board member that's performing at a higher level that isn't, as the beginning of the presentation implied, dysfunctional. We're all working and going in the same direction. Now, there was some discussion about types of board members. Dave Sternberg's 3 kinds of board members, and I developed this through a lot of research. And I'm going to tell you what the research was. It's 20 plus years of working with boards. So it's both not peer reviewed, it's not published, and it is not in any way technical. But let me share with you the 3 kinds of board members that every single one of your boards have. One is what I call GIs. That's what I call them. They're get-its. Those board members are the upper echelon of board members. They would have been bored by my presentation because they understand this. They've been doing this work. They're down for what does it take for them to learn more, be better, and make the board better. They're your go-to people, right? And as you're listening, sometimes, particularly when we do this session, first people start writing down names of people who fit in which of these categories. So you got your get-its. Then you have what I call a fence rider. Now, a fence rider is someone who may or may not be with you on a certain subject. It just kind of depends, right? If you bring a concept and it's a sunny day and I feel good, I'm going to participate. But if it's overcast and cloudy, and I got work when I get back to the office, I don't want to do it, right? And not always dependable. Sometimes are. They're riding the fence. They're a fence rider, right? And finally, you have a group of board members that I call NGGIs is my technical term, but never gonna get it. These board members I affectionately call never gonna get it for one very simple reason. They're never going to get it. It does not matter what the group wants to do. It doesn't matter the evidence that you can offer that change is necessary. There's nothing you're going to do to change the nature, the viewpoint, and the approach that the never gonna get it's have. You're just not. Now, I ask, and you can put this in chat, and I'll see this. I will ask. Let's see if this version looks similar to an in-person response. Which of the groups of board members do we spend most of our time? Do we spend most of our time with the get-its, the fence riders, or the never gonna get it's? What's your opinion? Who gets most of our time and energy? Let me know. What do you think? Give me a 1, 2, or 3 in the chat. Yeah, it is right. So it is a whole host of us admitting that the never gonna get it's get all our attention. They're the ones that get our attention. And here's the sad reality, okay? They get our attention because we're trying to change them. Let's be honest. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to change people. And I can't be more emphatic about this. If you want to change somebody, here's my advice. You should marry them. That's going to ensure that you can create some change. Now, some of you have immediately realized that that doesn't change someone. And indeed, if that does not, you are not going to change these folks. Let me find out in chat again, of the 1, 2s, and 3s, who should get most of our attention? Now we know the 3s get it, and I just said they shouldn't. What do you think? Is it the 1s or the 2s? Okay, we have a smattering of answers, 1 and 2. Of course, those are your only choices. The answer is the fence riders, because there are some fence riders that if we approach them correctly, they will indeed become get-its. And so the get-its are get-its. They're super get-its. So how many of the fence riders can we convert? That's our big issue. So build as many of those as you can. And I'm giving you the authority, and I don't have this authority. Work with that group of board members. This is about creating a culture shift, and trying to do it with 3s is not going to get you there. In fact, for those of us of a certain age, we would listen to the Peanuts cartoons, and when the parents and the teachers in the background talk, this is what you would hear, right? I want you to hear this when the number 3s in your organization talk. This is all I want you to hear. They're not going to be helpful. They're going to frustrate us, and they run board members off. And I think we have an obligation to make sure that we can change some of this structure and culture, and we just got to be honest about how we go about doing it. So, Jay, questions? What kind of questions or thoughts or reactions do people have?
Dave, you were on a roll, so I did not want to stop you. So back a little bit, but first of all, thank you for this. And I want to say this again for everybody. We have made a recording of this. We're continuing to record for the questions that come up now. And this recording will be both placed on the DonorSearch site. That's at DonorSearch.net. But also there's going to be an email coming to you with a link to it directly. And Dave, will you be willing to share the slides as well?
Absolutely. Anybody who wants them, just let me know.
Well, so we'll put that in there as well. So just look in your email, 24 to 48 hours from now, you should have that directly from DonorSearch. Now, I'll go back to the first questions that came in, and that was about areas of expertise. And Jemima had said, in the areas of expertise, is there a line for fundraiser? Or in other words, someone who is a professional fundraiser for your board?
There can be. I'm going to tell you that I wouldn't make that a high priority. And the reason I wouldn't is what I've heard anecdotally is the conflict of interest possibility. Are they raising money for? Now, I think we in the development field should serve on boards, so it's not like it's serve on board or don't. I think we're better off looking for volunteers with that skill.
Yeah. We have one from Gary who asked, does this document, I'm sorry, I don't know which document that Gary's referring to, but you may. Does this document outline the role of the governance committee and nominating committee?
The board building cycle, I think, is what he's referring to. It does indeed have a description of those committees in the document. Yes, that it's a handbook. They have great materials, but it's in there. Yes. Yep.
And a follow-up question, which is, what about sharing that there is an annual gift requirement to serve on the board? When you were going through all that, I don't remember you saying that specifically.
Well, I did. What I said is you must make an annual contribution from your resources. And so I'm very, very big on you have to be a donor. This opens up Pandora's box about, well, some people can afford to give more than others. That's a whole nother discussion, but there must be a give. And it, in my opinion, you must give what is, I like the phrase, Jay, give a gift that you care how large enough that you care how the organization spends it. Jay, for you, that's $1 million. For me, that's $15. Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, and that's a mythical example, but yes.
Okay.
Well, and you showed that with a spreadsheet too. In fact, I have a follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
So when you're listing all that, and let's say that instead of board member number 1 and number 2, that you have actual names, because you talked about that a bit. Now there you do list the amounts, and that and some people commensurate with one's ability and commitment.
Correct.
For one person, that might be, as you're saying, $25. For another person, it's $1 million. So how much transparency do you have on that? When you consider that issue about people's varying ability?
Yeah, I think that's going to depend from board to board and their culture. Okay, right. So look at your culture and decide what should that look like. I know organizations, Jay, for example, that it's made a gift, yes or no, not an amount. I mean, that can have equal impact. So, right. Decide what works best in your organization. I have a flair for the dramatic. I like to churn up conversation and get people uptight.
And let me ask you one other follow-up on that, which is that the solicitations to the board by the board, which is great. So the accountability is there. You've been talking about that all throughout. But is it a direct solicitation? So in other words, is it just a letter from the board chair because it's an easy lift, or is it people sitting down with people or going together on the phone? How is that handled?
Yeah, I have an order of operation for that, Jay. It should be the board chair having, number one, best case scenario, board chair having a direct solicitation of each board member. Okay. If that can't be done, then I think it's direct communication from the board chair. Is that a letter? Is that an email? But I'm glad you asked this question, because as that goes in a full circle, if we're not going to let everyone on the board know that some people have given and some people haven't, then it's really not a requirement. So you have to tie that into how do you want to create accountability?
Right. Well, and then going back to questions from the group here, let me see. I know we had some later, so I'm going to quickly look. And I know we had one in the Q&A as well from an anonymous attendee, always my favorite. How would you approach a board that doesn't enforce term limits on the board president?
Oh, that's interesting. So here's one strategy, Jay, that I have. They're always anonymous when they ask questions like that, right? This is going to show up on YouTube.
It's understandable.
Right, I get it. By the way, there's nearly 2 million nonprofit organizations. I'd venture to say that at least 100,000 have this problem. So whoever put that up there, feel that you're not in territory alone. I always say, if what you heard today was of great value, I would seek my get-its on my board, and I would spend a little time educating them and helping them understand the value of the board building cycle and why it works. And I would help them understand why it's important to set policies and procedures in place. And if they could get someone to do something as seemingly as innocuous as, we're going to create a task force to look at board operations, knowing in the background that this is an issue they're going to deal with, that might be how I would approach it, because it's, no one knows that there's an agenda. There may be other things indeed that are relevant. And that'd be how I would start that. I mean, there's always just more I don't know. So.
And we have a couple more. Are you willing to take a couple more before we close?
Please.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
So another one is, let me see. This is kind of a broad one, but I love this. For an organization that's establishing a brand new board, what would be your top piece of advice?
Well, I'm going to make a caveat. I'm going to give you my top pieces of advice, maybe more than one. If it's founder-led, then it's going to be very important that the founder seek people that are beyond their own personal comfort zone and are not there just for them. And the reason I say that is it gets harder downstream when everyone feels like they're bought into the organization because of the individual and not the mission. And the truth is they're never going to tell you otherwise. But my best piece of advice is be strategic about the needs and grow at a slow pace. Your bylaws will probably tell you what your minimum is. Start with the minimum and then go about adding maybe 2 a year, or 2 or 3 in a class so that you can stagger this, but do it very strategically. And don't be shy about what the needs are, despite the fact that it's new.
You talked a lot about this issue about term limits very eloquently. I don't hear many people talk about term limits in terms of founder-led organizations for the founders themselves, staff in the staff leadership. Is that anything you're willing to touch on, or?
Oh, sure.
Not today?
Yeah, I'll touch on everything. I mean, I've been around the block.
Yeah.
So a couple things. One is that's only an issue if the founder decides that they want a good exit strategy, a wholesome, meaningful exit strategy. So let's assume the answer to that is yes. My goal was to burst the organization and step away. I'm all about, I've seen the most sort of efficient way. It falls into 1 of 2 categories. One is a design pace departure, which is 2 years on the board with vote, maybe 1 more year on the board, no vote, or it's just like pulling off the Band-Aid. They are not on the board. The organization knows they're an advisor to the organization, and that's that. Those are the 2 that to me have seemed to be the best. You got to put the plan together and follow it, or just remove the Band-Aid. Otherwise, it just never happens.
And maybe as a final question, this one also from our crowd here, it's a great question. It's also one that requires that combination of, what you just did, which is diplomacy and willingness to take action. Sometimes it hurts for a second. And that's, how do you gently remove a board member who thinks they are participating and performing the same as others? And I guess implicitly that maybe they're not.
Well, when you do this, I've heard this anecdotally. When you do a self-evaluation, it goes back to the governance committee.
Yeah.
Jay, everyone knows who's performing and who isn't. I'm going to tell you that right off the bat. Even out doing this, they know. They don't want to tell anybody they know, but they know. I would have a meeting with them, and I would say a couple things. I'd say, well, we noticed that your attendance wasn't what is required. We're wondering if there's some things happening in your personal life that have necessitated this, and is this a time to take a leave? The other is they've just overstated their evaluation and it's not accurate, and I mean this. I would say, Jay, you are a great board member. I'd like to explore ways to even improve on that as an example for others, because as you start to press them, well, now I noticed we missed you at the last board meeting and your gift hasn't come in. I don't want you to lose that status, like this then opens that door of conversation.
Yeah.
Jake, candidly, I'm the guy to sit down and go, Jay, yeah, the evaluation just wasn't accurate, but many people won't do that. So, that's the other way.
Yeah. Although I wish you hadn't used my name in that example.
But
I understand your point. And that's a great way to end. Dave, thank you so much for all of this today. I'm going to read this so for those who are listening, they'll have the information. Dave Sternberg, obviously at Loring Sternberg and Associates. You can find them at loringsternberg.com. And also, I guess people can reach out to you directly there or through LinkedIn if they want to learn more.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So you'll get straight advice from Dave, which is exactly why we're so grateful to have you today. Thanks so much for taking time to share this, Dave. Really do appreciate it.
It was a pleasure being here. Thanks, Jay.
Hopefully we'll have you back soon. And in the meantime, I want to encourage everybody to take a look at the rest of the stuff we have coming up the rest of this year and into the new year. You're going to learn all that at DonorSearch.net, along with everything about what they do, including understanding a good bit about your prospective, current, and past board members, all of whom are very important as we do this work. Again, that's at DonorSearch.net, where there will also be recordings of this session and many others, both the CFRE and webcasts and our podcast. We just dropped an episode this week with Jennifer Lee Dotson, which is quite moving. I hope you'll enjoy that. It takes us all the way from an emergency landing in Hawaii, where she was born, to Mount Everest, where she almost died, and everything in between. I'm sure you'll enjoy that in the podcast. And you can learn more about that and a lot of other things if you pull out your phone and get ready for a QR code that's about to appear on your screen. So with that, we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, take care.